Hello and welcome to Torah with Tim. I hope everyone out there is enjoying my videos and learning things and getting better and better in regards to their walk with Yah and keeping his commandments. What I'm going to address today is Galatians. We looked at Romans last week. And in Galatians, we are going to look also, as we did in Romans, to questionable verses in which people may say Paul is saying do away with the Torah or the instructions, or as some people call it, the law. So let's get straight into it. The first reading or verses we're going to look at is Galatians chapter 3, verses 10 to 14. Galatians chapter 3, verses 10 to 14. So it goes like this. For as many are of the works of the Torah are under the curse, for it has been written, cursed is everyone who does not continue in all that has been written in the book of the Torah to do them. And no one is declared right by the Torah before Elohim is clear, for the righteous shall live by faith. And the Torah is not of belief, but the man who does them shall live by him. Messiah has redeemed us from the curse of the Torah becoming a curse for us, for it has been written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree, in order that the Barak of Abraham may come upon the nations in the Messiah Yeshua to receive the promise of the Ruach through belief. Okay, so what's being talked about here is being mentioned about blessings and curses. Or cursing. So let's go to Deuteronomy 11:26, and we'll go through to 28. So this is Moses speaking to the people just before they cross back into the promised land. See, I'm putting before you today a barakah and a curse. The barakah, when you obey the commands of Yahweh your Elohim, which I command you today, and the curse if you do not obey the commands of Yahweh your Elohim, but turn aside from the way which I have commanded you today, to go after other mighty ones which you have not known. So Paul is not reinventing the wheel in Galatians. He's just quoting out of the Torah, being Deuteronomy, which we have just read. Paul is not saying that the Torah is a curse. He's just saying that the penalty for not keeping the Torah is a curse. He's also saying that unless you keep the law perfectly, which no one does, then this would result or does result in the curses. So what's the remedy for this situation? We can read that there in verse 13. Galatians 3:13, it says, the Messiah redeemed us from the curse of the Torah, having become a curse for us. So he took the curses upon himself, because it also says, cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. And the tree they're talking about as what people call it today, being the cross. Okay. He died in our place and took the curses upon himself that should have been put upon us. So in saying that, the law can still provide us with the knowledge of what sin is, and also associated blessings and curses for keeping the Torah or for not keeping the Torah. And when we fall short in keeping the Torah, it's Yeshua's sacrifice that delivers us from the eternal condemnation which the curses would otherwise bring. That is, not attaining eternal life. And what's happening here is also a reprimand towards the Jews in Paul's day, who were keeping the Torah solely for justification purposes, which we have just found out can't be done because we all fall short of the glory of God, or Yah, and it can't be done apart from Yeshua's sacrifice. Paul did not have any issue with keeping the Torah, but he had an issue with the Jews believing that they could earn righteous standing before Yahweh through keeping it. That's why in the rest of this chapter, in Galatians 3, Paul goes on to say that if inheritance is by the Torah, it's no longer regarded as a promise, because Yahweh said he would bless Abraham's seed. That is by the promise, not by the Torah. If you go to verse 18, Galatians 3:18, it says, "For if the inheritance is by the Torah, it is no longer by the promise, but Elohim gave it to Abraham through the promise." Okay, so it's through the promised seed being Yeshua. But then in verse 19 it says, "Why then the Torah? It was added because of transgressions until the seed should come to whom the promise was made. And it was ordained through messengers, that is angels, in the hand of a mediator." So it was added because of transgressions, or rather to reveal what transgressions are, to reveal what sin is. And the Torah's sacrificial system that was put in place also reveals how Yahweh deals with sin, that is by the innocent dying on behalf of the sinner, that is the sacrificial animals that died in place of the sinner during that time before Yeshua's ultimate sacrifice. Okay, so that's what's happening here. The Torah is not a curse. It's telling us what sin is, and it's pointing us towards that promised seed being Yeshua. Okay, so let's go to Galatians 3:23 to 3:25. It says, "But before belief came, we were being guarded under the Torah, having been shut up for the belief being about to be revealed. Therefore the Torah became our trainer unto the Messiah, in order that we be declared right by belief. And after belief has come, we are no longer under the trainer." Okay, so Paul here is saying that the Torah is steering us on the proper course to get to the goal of the Torah. Now, the goal of the Torah is Yeshua. The Torah is seen, if you will, as a pedagogue. Now, a lot of scholars believe this is what Paul was talking about in this verse. Now, a pedagogue was an escort of a student to bring them to the teacher. It was like a hired servant that would bring the student towards the teacher or to the teacher's place of residence, but not the teacher themselves. So Paul was basically using the pedagogue as an example. So the Torah so too leads us to the need for Yeshua, not only through highlighting what sin is, but the price that needs to be paid for that sin. That is the perfect Torah abiding sacrifice, being Yeshua. Let's go to Romans 7:7-9, just to sort of show you how the Torah works and how Paul's experience is good for us, because we can then reflect on our experience. So Romans 7:7-9. What then shall we say? Is the Torah sin? Let it not be. However, I did not know sin except through the Torah. For also covetousness I did not know, if the Torah had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, having taken the occasion through the command, worked in me all covetousness. For apart from the Torah, sin is dead. And I was alive apart from the Torah, but once the command came, the sin revived, and I died. Verse 10, and the command which was to result in high, that is life, this I found to result in death. So Paul is saying here in Romans that without the Torah and the proper knowledge of sin, he was conceited and believed that he was actually doing well, that is righteous. But then when the knowledge of the Torah and what sin is and its condemning stance of the Torah towards evil desires or sin, Paul's conscience was awakened and his associated guilt. And so too the goal or need for Yeshua became highlighted. And this was also spoken about to Abraham, this perfect sacrifice, this promised seed. Look, when I was an apprentice plasterer, often at times I thought I was a lot better than what I was. And I often thought I was good as most tradesmen when I was still learning. How often there would be times when experts in our field, in the trade of plastering, would be called in to work alongside us to complete jobs to, I suppose you call it, fine specification. Now, such experiences of them coming in, these experts, would help me recognise my undeveloped skill level and the need for an expert. Just like the Torah points to the need for the expert, being Yeshua, and we can claim that expertise through faith. He does the job right. Just because the Torah has now brought me to my need for faith does not mean I can go and do whatever I want. It's still needed to define sin and to provide those blessings and curses. We should also keep in mind that Paul is still providing a reprimand towards the Jews who are keeping the Torah solely for justification purposes, apart from Yeshua's sacrifice. They were completely forgetting or ignoring the promised seed that was given to Abraham. All right. So the next verse is Galatians chapter 4, verses 8-11. But then indeed, not knowing Elohim, you serve those which by nature are not mighty ones. But now after you have known Elohim, or rather are known by Elohim, you do turn again to the weak and poor elementary matters to which you want to be enslaved again. You closely observe days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you, lest by any means I have laboured for you in vain. Okay, so Paul is talking about labouring in vain. He's just witnessed and told these new converts how to worship and so forth. But these new converts, as it says in verse 10, you closely observe days and months, seasons and years. Or even in verse 9, it's saying you're turning again to the weak and poor elementary matters, which you want to be enslaved again. So they're returning to their pagan ways of worship. This has nothing to do with doing away with the Sabbath or the high Sabbaths or the festival days or the festival occasions. It's talking about these new converts returning to their old ways of worshipping false gods. If you look in verse 8, it says, indeed, not knowing Elohim, you serve those which by nature are not mighty ones. So the mighty ones here is actually who are not gods. So they're returning to worshipping false gods and observing the accompanying days to do that. All right, so that one's pretty straightforward and fairly clear. So the next verses is Galatians chapter 4, verses 21 to 31. Say to me, you who want to be under the Torah, do you not hear the Torah? For it has been written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by a female servant, the other by a free woman. But he who was of the female servant was born according to the flesh, and he of the free woman through the promise. This is analogy, for these are 2 covenants. One indeed from Mount Sinai, which brings forth slavery, which is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, which is the mother of us all. For it has been written, rejoice, O barren, you who do not bear. Break forth and shout, you who do not have the birth pains. For the deserted one has many more children than she who has a husband. And we, brothers, as Yishak was, are children of the promise. But as he who was born according to the flesh then persecuted him who is according to the Ruach, so also now. But what does the scripture say? Cast out the female servant and her son, for the son of the female servant shall by no means be an heir with the son of the free woman. Therefore, brothers, we are not children of the female servant, but of the free woman. So if you look at verse 25, it says, corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in slavery with her children. So Paul is talking about what's currently happening in Jerusalem at that time, when the Judaizers sought to use human means to fulfill Yah's divine promises, that is, keeping the law by human effort. They contended would then bring salvation. Indeed, they taught that Gentiles must accept circumcision and become Jews and keep the law of Moses to be saved. Paul is saying this is so similar to Abraham's use of human effort in trying to manifest or bring about Yah's promise through producing Ishmael by Hagar, that was the slave woman, rather than being patient in having Isaac through Sarah according to the promise. The approach of the Judaizers to the Sinai covenant, that is the Torah, is the same as to slavery and parallel to the slave woman Hagar and her child Ishmael. Only dependence on the grace and promise of Yah will bring about true freedom and deliverance. That is what Paul is saying. Hence, although the Judaizers in the flesh are the sons of Isaac, they act more like the son of the slave woman, Ishmael, to Hagar. They are acting in the flesh and do not give true testimony to the meaning of Yah's promises to Abraham. That is, the promised seed that was to become one of his descendants. Okay, so that's that one taken care of. Galatians 5, chapter 5, 1 to 5. We'll read that one now as well. In the freedom which the Messiah has made us free, stand firm then, and do not again be held with a yoke of slavery. See, I say to you that if you become circumcised, the Messiah shall be of no use to you. And I witness again to every man being circumcised that he is a debtor to do the entire Torah. You who are declared right by the Torah have severed yourselves from the Messiah and have fallen from favour. For we in the Ruach, by belief, eagerly wait for the expectation of righteousness. Now, people will read this and then they'll go, well, following the Torah is the same as slavery. But then you've got to sort of ask yourself, well, why did Paul continue to follow it and continue to teach the Torah? And people say, well, look, Paul's saying no to circumcision. But if Paul was against circumcision, why did he circumcise Timothy in Acts 6:13, I believe it? No, 6:3, I believe it was. The issue here of what Paul is talking about is the ritual conversion to Judaism that was being pushed on the new followers, and saying this is what needs to be done as a prerequisite to salvation. Paul is saying that this mindset puts people into slavery and then they're not under grace. It says in verse 4, you who are declared right by the Torah have severed yourself from the Messiah. You have fallen from favour. You have fallen from grace. So once again, the Judaizers were teaching that Yahweh's grace could be earned through human effort. It's the misuse of the Torah. It's the misuse of the Torah that Paul has an issue with, not the Torah itself. Anyway, I hope this has been a good teaching. I hope this has cleared out some matters that you may have in regards to the Torah and the law and keeping it. I will admit Galatians and Romans are challenging books, but you always got to view the whole scriptures, not just the New Testament. You got to look at the Old Testament as well, and you also got to look at what Yeshua said in regards to keeping the Torah, and also look at Paul himself. People say Paul says that the law was done away, or the Torah was done away with, but he himself kept the Torah and he taught the Torah. And that could be the focus of another lesson, looking at all these occasions that Paul actually encouraged the keeping of the Torah, and even Yeshua himself encouraged it as well. So I hope you're doing well, that you're sticking to that narrow path. Broad is the path to destruction, and that you have a good rest of the day. And we only have today with its worries. Get through that and take each day one day at a time in following Yah and doing all that He instructs. Thank you.